Good evening, Maureen. Just sharing it on two more platforms, and we will get rolling. It's going to be quite the journey we're going to make tonight. It's going to be worth your stay. So if you're tired, drink coffee like Seth is doing, like Baruch's doing, and so you can stay awake. I won't be offended if you fall asleep, but you'll just be missing out. Okay, we shared it everywhere we're going to share it, and we're going to get rolling. We are beginning tonight on page 138, 139 in the Lifetime Chumash. Baruch, you'll grab a Chumash on the way in. It is the fifth portion. It's crazy how time flies. We are in the fifth portion in the book of Genesis, in the book of Bereshis. And I'm actually taking you to almost to the end of the portion of this coming Shabbos. So to the sixth reading. And this is one of those things that, you read about Abraham, you read about Sarah, you read about Isaac, Hagar, Ishmael, the Akedah, the Sodom and Gomorrah. We read about all the big stories, and then there's suddenly a story right here, smack in the middle of a primary Torah portion of Genesis. There's details that are so foundational, and somehow they get, glanced over. People don't really pay attention. And tonight we're going to do just that. We're going to pay attention. So on page 139, we read as follows. So just to give you context, we are dealing here with Sarah passed away. Isaac gets married to Rebecca, to Rivka. And now the Torah tells us as follows. Chapter 25, verse 1. Abraham took another wife, and her name was Keturah, also known as Hagar. She bore him Zimran, Yokshan, Medan, Midyan, Yishbak, and Shuach. So Abraham remarries Hagar. He had divorced Hagar, right? Based on Sarah's request that he get rid of Hagar. She was too much trouble for Sarah. There was a lot of inter-wife rivalry, wife/concubine rivalry. So he gets rid of Hagar, he gets rid of Ishmael, and now that Sarah's gone, and you could say Abraham, Yitzchak is married now, Isaac is married to Rebecca. Abraham is he's 140 years old approximately here, and he remarries Hagar. Her name is Keturah, and there's many explanations for why her name is Keturah. Keturah comes from the word Katira, is Katarna, which means a bonding, that she, the positive interpretation is that she really helped Abraham, elevated the bond of Abraham and humanity with God to a higher level. And Abraham and Hagar give birth to an additional 6 sons. So there's Isaac and Ishmael, and now we have Zimran, Yokshan, Medan, Midyan, Yishbak, and Shuach. Then it says Yokshan fathered Sheva and Dedan. The sons of Dedan were Ashurim, Letushim, and Leumim. Midyan his sons were Ephah, Enoch, Avida, Eldah. And then it says something just as a side note, and I think I mentioned this once before. It says, Abraham gave all the power of blessing that he possessed to Isaac, to the sons of Abraham's concubine. Abraham gave gifts. He sent them away eastward from his son Isaac, while this Abraham was still alive, to the land of the east. So there's many explanations. So he gave Isaac the gift of blessing. He gave these 6 sons, he gave them what it calls here gifts. And according to the commentators and the Talmud, he gave them the gift of the occult. He gave them the gift of black magic. And he sent them east. Where's east? Where's east of Israel? He sent them to Asia. Well, he sent them east of there. He sent them all the way east. And there are those that believe that a lot of the Asians are descendants of Abraham and Hagar's 6 sons that were sent away going east. So you had Isaac, who's the father of the Jews, Ishmael, who's the son, who's the father of many of the, not all, but many of the Arabs and the Muslims. And then you have the Asians, who are also descendants of Abraham through the 6 sons that were sent to the east. So that is what the verse tells us. Don't get rid of your Chumash yet for tonight, because I'm going to jump back to a bunch of verses in a few moments. So here's the $1 million question. We just read about an incredible miracle, right? We spoke last week's Torah portion. We read about Isaac being born when Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90, and we made such a to-do about it because they were 190, right? He was 100, she was 90. It was a supernatural event. It was a miracle, not only because Sarah was older than the age of conception, of child rearing, but because Abraham, as a father of 100 years old, generally 100-year-old men are not procreating. And so it's an incredible miracle. We talk about it. So much so that if you look, for example, if you want to go back for a minute to chapter 17, verse 17 in Parshas Lech Lecha, I'm going to quote for you what it says over there. Chapter 17, verse 17 says, Abraham fell on his face and rejoiced. He said to himself, could anyone be so fortunate as I that a child be born to a person who is 100 years old? Could anyone be so fortunate as Sarah, who at 90 years old will have the merit of giving birth? So Abraham himself confesses that giving birth at this age is considered something incredible. If you look later at last week's Torah portion in Vayera, in chapter 18, verse 11, so chapter 18, verse 11, and I quote, when the angels came and told them that they're going to have children, told Sarah, chapter 18, verse 11 says, Abraham and Sarah were old, but still immersed in daily life. Sarah had stopped having a woman's cycle. Looking at her bodily organs, Sarah laughed, saying, after I have withered, will I now have a smooth skin and my husband is old? Like, what are you guys? So God got upset because she laughed. The bottom line is, it's clear that when you study the Torah, the birth of Isaac was considered a miracle of all miracles. And yet, 40 years later, when Abraham is now giving birth to another 6 sons, the Torah mentions it like casually, like we're reading, a weather report, that he had a Hagar, Keturah, they had 6 sons, and here's their names, FYI. Where's the excitement? Where's the announcement? Where's the miracle? Where's the recognition that this is something out of the ordinary? And Nachmanides, the Ramban, one of the primary commentators of the Torah, says that the novelty of Isaac's birth was not about Abraham, because 100-year-old men, certainly back then, were able to procreate. The novelty was that Sarah was able to carry the child, but that's only Nachmanides. Rashi, the preeminent Torah commentator, who gives us the most simplistic, the most practical understanding of the verse, makes it very clear that even though there were times, before the flood, where even men at 500 years old were procreating, but at the time Abraham came around, there was weakness in the world, and therefore the average age where people were giving birth was 60 to 70. So when Abraham procreated and was able to bring a child to this world, which was Isaac, it was a big deal. And if that's the case, then why 40 years later, when he's having another 6 sons, right? They weren't born, they weren't sextuplets, they weren't born together. So it means there was 6 pregnancies. He was the father of 6 new children with Hagar, and the Torah mentions it like casually without any grandiose announcement. Now, even if you'll say that by 100, Abraham wasn't so old, right? By 100, when he gave birth to Isaac, let's say you take Nachmanides' opinion, Ramban's opinion, that 100 wasn't such a big deal. But after he was 100, it says, Avram Zokim Bawayam, that Abraham he came of days. He got older. So if he got older when he's 140, it should be considered a miracle. So then why do we ignore it, and why isn't there a clear recognition of this incredible miracle that took place in Abraham's life in the conception, in bringing 6 new sons to the world with his newly remarried wife, Hagar? So what I share with you tonight is a combination of talks from the Rebbe from the fall of 1984 and the fall of 1982. Who? Well, in a sense, Abraham and Sarah.
That's when she
became righteous.
Yeah.
In the sense, Abraham and Sarah were the first converts to Judaism.
That's why she was so sweet, like the incense.
So yeah, I mean, calling her the first ger is a big statement. Calling her a very righteous person, sweet like the incense, is very real. So what I share with you from this talk in the 80s is actually very foundational, not just for the history of Sarah and Abraham, but for how we today learn to interact with the world around us, and I will explain. When Isaac was born, right, we said that Sarah looked at herself and she said, is this some kind of joke? Everyone that's going to look at me is going to think that this is a joke. And Rashi explains that in order to ensure, very fascinating, that when Sarah gave birth to Isaac, she was worried that people will say that it's Abraham's child, not hers. Right? There was a surrogate mom. She ain't the mom. There's no way that she gave birth. She was concerned about that. She wanted people to recognize the miracle of the fact that she carried Isaac as a baby. And so not only did she have the ability now to give birth and nurse her son, but it says that in merit of Sarah's birth, Sarah giving birth to Isaac, many barren women became pregnant, many ill people became well, many prayers were answered with Sarah's prayer, and there was a lot of joy in the world, which is why his name is Yitzchak. Yitzchak means laughter, joy, because when he was born, not just was there laughter and joy in his family, but the world around him became very joyous. In other words, the miracle of Isaac's birth was in a way that it brought salvation and blessing and many, many gifts of happiness to the world around. So when everyone came to celebrate Isaac's birth, right, Sarah could have just nursed her own baby, and that would be a good proof that she's capable of bearing a child and nursing that baby. But instead, what it says is that many, many people came to bring their babies off the street, adoptive babies, foster babies. They brought babies to Sarah so Sarah can nurse them all. That's what we learn in the Medrash on Parshat Lech Lecha, and Rashi brings that. Why? What was the point? Why did Sarah have to nurse random babies to make a point? Why was it enough that she should just nurse her baby? And the truth is, the answer is in itself. It wasn't just about proving to the world. It was about showing and experiencing with the world that all of these blessings, the ill people that were healed, and the barren women who gave birth, and these babies who needed nursing, all of these blessings came to the world in conjunction with the incredible blessing and miracle of Isaac's birth. So when God gifted Isaac to Abraham and Sarah, he also gifted the world along with that incredible blessing of a patriarch of the Jewish people, the first Jewish child to be born, by the way. Isaac was the first Jewish child to be born because Abraham and Sarah weren't born Jewish. They shifted from being pagans to being Jewish. So the first child that was born, Ishmael wasn't either, because Ishmael was born before Abraham had the circumcision. Isaac is the first baby born from a father who was circumcised and a mother who together brought this Jewish baby into the world. And when that blessing of that baby came into the world, it not only brought a miracle for the family, but brought a collective miracle for the entire region, for the entire community, because of this baby that was born. Same thing with Abraham. The fact that Abraham was able to procreate not only brought a gift to the creation of Isaac, but allowed for him to bring more miracles later, including the gift of 6 more children that came 40 years later when he was remarrying Hagar. But if that's the case, I see already your question, Baruch. If that's the case, right? First of all, why did Isaac's birth have to create more blood? What's wrong with a family just having their incredible own miracle with Isaac's birth? Why did it have to bring blessings to the whole world? And also, why did Sarah's miracle of giving birth need immediate proof or immediate recognition in the world around them, in the sense that women who needed nursing came to Sarah and she was able to nurse their babies? And Abraham, 40 years later, the bonus miracles from Isaac's birth in the Abraham realm took 40 years later. And also by Sarah, it was almost a natural result, right? She happened to be nursing her son, and now she could nurse other children. With Abraham, it was a totally different reality. Right, there was the birth of Isaac, and 40 years later, there were 6 new miracles of the birth of these 6 sons. They were not related to the birth of Isaac. It wasn't a miracle that came about through the birth of Isaac that now continued for other people. It was a totally new miracle as a result. So why was there such a difference between Sarah and Abraham in the way their miracles came about via the blessing that came with Isaac's birth? And I think it's safe to say this is what I'm about to say. This next 10 seconds is my own thing. That is, in the 80s, the Rebbe spent a lot of time focusing on the Jewish role in the world as it relates to inspiring the rest of the world to follow the 7 Noahide laws, the universal laws of Noah, which God commanded all of humanity to follow. And the Rebbe in the 80s made a real big shturim, a big ruckus to get the world to recognize that this is not something we can just, we don't get to abdicate ourselves from this. It's part of who we are as Jews to be able to share that with the world. And here in this particular talk on Parshas Chayesara, the Rebbe took this story with Abraham and Sarah and the birth of Isaac and the miracles that ensue as a result, and what those particular miracles were, including the 6 sons that Abraham bore with Hagar, to explain to us the different approaches and how we're supposed to deal with the majority of the world. Right? You have a question?
I just wanted to wonder if there's any correlation to the 6 other sons and Sarah breastfeeding. Could she be at all breastfeeding?
She wasn't alive anymore. Sarah passed away in the beginning of this week's Parsha, before Abraham remarried Hagar and before they had their 6 sons. So it wouldn't be relevant at all. So it's really, I read yesterday, I read that the world is reaching a population of 8 billion. Of the 8 billion, I'm not a mathematician, but let's say if you want to be conservative, we could be even liberal about it. Let's say there's 15 million Jews. Do you know what 15 million of 8 billion is? It's a very, very small minority. I'll leave it to the mathematicians to figure out the exact percentage, but it's very small. And so if that's the case, there are important things that we need to discuss as a Jewish community in how we interact with the vast majority of humanity, and what message are we supposed to be bringing to the world, and how we are all to serve our Creator. So here begins this foundational concept. Before Abraham and Sarah gave birth to Isaac, God changed their names. So if you look in chapter 15, verse 5, I'm going to open it up here just so I can read straight from the verse. Chapter 15, verse 5 in Genesis, it says as follows. Hold on, maybe I got the wrong one. So Rashi, I'm sorry. So chapter 17, verse 5, apologize. So it says, so chapter 17, verse 5 in Genesis says, your name shall no longer be called Avram, but your name shall be called Avraham, for I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. Av Hamoin Goyim. So his name was Avram, which means Avram, the father of the Arameans, of the nation of Aram. God added a Hey, the letter Hey, to his name, making it Avraham, which means I made you a father of a multitude of nations, expanding Abraham's scope of leadership and scope of inspiration to a much bigger operation than just the one tribe, if you wish, or one group of people, but to a much bigger group of people. And the same thing when it comes to Sarah, in chapter 21, verse, 17. Chapter 17, verse 15 says, God said to Abraham, as for your wife Sarai, you shall not call her by the name Sarai, for Sarah is her name. I will bless her so she can produce milk, and will also give you a son from her. And so she went from being Sarai, which is more of an internal experience of who she was, meaning the leadership role within herself, to Sarah, which means a leader over many. So suddenly, before Isaac's born, both Abraham and Sarah's name changes to represent a more communal form of leadership that includes the nations of the world as a whole. So it has obviously the birth of Isaac as something very foundational, has to do something foundational with our effect on the world around us, right? Isaac was the first Jewish child to be born as a Jew. And if his birth was connected to his parents' name changing from Avram to Avraham and Sarai to Sarah, which means recognizing their role as being fathers and mothers, leaders of the world as a whole, it means that to be a Jew, we are not just to be insular. We are not just supposed to be tribal within our own tribe and ignore the world. We are meant to care for the world and take care of the world. And that's why when Isaac was born, just a second, son, and that's why when Isaac was born, naturally, the miracles associated with Isaac's birth brought much joy to the world, because that is what a Jew does. A Jew, by definition, is someone who's supposed to bring not just joy within their own community, but to bring meaning and joy and living a meaningful life to the people around them. And there's two ways to go about that. There's the way of doing it, which is the Sarah way, and then there's the way of doing it, which is the Abraham way. I'm going to talk about those differences in a moment. But to understand those differences, we have to look at the Rambam. What's your question? Yuta Hey, two Heys. Abraham got a Hey, and Sarah got a Hey.
Oh. He's going to take it 5, 5, 5 for the numerical numbers.
Hey is 5 and Yud is 10, but Hey and Hey is 10. So the Rambam, Maimonides, says as follows as it relates to the 7 Noahide laws. This is straight out of the codification of Jewish law from Maimonides. He says like this: Siva Moshe Rabbeinu Piagvura, Moses commanded from the mouth of the Lord. Lochev is kol boya olam. So Moses commanded the Jews with the words of God that we are to bring about that all the people in the world, lekabel mitzvah shitzav, the entire world should accept upon themselves the 7 laws that God gave Noah. And then it says, kol makabel sheva mitzvahs, whoever accepts upon themselves the 7 Noahide laws, meaning any Gentile that accepts upon themselves to fulfill the 7 Noahide laws, v'nizar la'asoisem, and is very scrupulous about observing them, harei zeh mechsidi umis olam, they are considered to be one of the righteous of the nations. They have a portion in Olam Haba in the world to come. But that's all conditional that they accept it upon themselves. They observe them. They should see them. They have to do it because God said so in the Torah, not because it makes sense to them, not because it's their own code. You have to do the 7 in order to get Olam Haba. You have to do it because God asked you to do it and told us to do it in the Torah and expressed it to us through Moshe. But if you did it by force, you still should do it, but you're not considered the righteous of the nations. That's what Maimonides says in the Laws of Kings, chapter 8, halacha 10 and 11. But all the commentators, well, not all, but many commentators wonder, what's up with Jews worrying about the Gentiles? We don't have enough going on. We have to worry about the whole world. But the truth is, there's no way to escape that. When God came to create the world, why did he create the world? It says Beis Reishis. Bereshis comes from the word Beis Reishis, 2 beginnings. That when God created the world, there was 2 reasons. V'shvil Yisrael shenikra Reishis, for the Jewish people that are called the first, and V'shvil HaTorah shenikra Reishis, for the Torah that's considered first. So the entire creation of the world, God envisioned that the creation of the world, that when he creates the world, he's going to give a Torah to the Jewish people. And when the Jewish people observe the Torah and do what he asks them to do, then all of creation becomes worthwhile. If that's the case, then everything to do in the world is connected to the Jews. There's no such thing. Perhaps that's a reason why the world is so obsessed with the Jews, because there's no other option. You can't not be obsessed with them. Unfortunately, most of their obsession is negative. But everything to do with the direction in which the world is going is inherently connected to the Jewish people, because they were the reason for creation in the first place, for the observance of the Torah by the Jewish people, which God wanted from day one. And in that realm, there's 2 ways to look at it. There's the beginning of the Rambam, where the Rambam says, we have to get the whole world on board. Just get everyone on board. But then there's a second half, which is, it's not about just getting them on board. It's about them doing it because God said so in the Torah. And almost where they're doing it naturally according to their own belief that this is the right thing to do because God said so in the Torah, and because Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, taught it to the Jewish people at Sinai and to the Gentiles at Sinai. And that's how they'll merit Olam Haba. So it becomes very clear that there's really 2 ways to get the world to do things. There's the brute force, or not force, but coercion. Come on! Like we used to do with, like we do with Jews in the streets of Manhattan, we get them to put on film. What happens if you get a Gentile in the middle of Manhattan and say, hey, do you believe in one God? Hey, excuse me, are you cruel to animals? Right? What? That would be the way of doing it by force. which may have its place. And according to the Rambam, especially in the land of Israel, when Jews are in control of the land of Israel, we should control who lives there. And if they're not following the 7 Noahide laws, maybe they shouldn't be in Israel. But there's a much, much better way to do it, which is the second half of what the Rambam is saying, is that the ultimate is when the nations of the world get to a recognition that they should accept the 7 laws upon themselves because God said so in the Torah and taught it to them through Moses. And then it's natural for who they are, right? Instead of some kind of, oh, they convinced me to do it. No, I come to my own recognition that this is an incredible thing, an incredible gift that God gave me, says the Gentile, through Moses, and I want to experience it. So there's the war path, if you wish, like the King David aspect, like when King David was conquering lands, and hey, you want to stay in my land? You got to follow these rules. But then there's a Derech Menucha, there's the King Solomon approach, right? Solomon was David's son. Solomon was a man of peace. And he was a man of peace, and he was able to bring the world on board without the war, right? They all came to honor Solomon. The world came to see Queen of Sheba. Everyone came to see him. Why? They respected him in a way of peace. And there's 2 ways to deal with the 7 Noahide laws. Either look at the world and say, oh, there, we have to knock it into the Gentile world. 7 Noahide laws. Or get the world to a place where they will want it as a gift from God to them via Moses. And that's what the Rambam really says. If you look at the end of the chapters of King, where it talks about the coming of Mashiach. So first it says that all there'll be the gathering of the exiles, and we will rectify the world to serve God in one, right? Tikkun olam. What is Tikkun olam? We'll rectify the world to get everyone to serve God as one. But later, literally at the end of the whole 14 books of Maimonides, it says in those days when Mashiach comes, there'll be no hunger, there'll be great abundance, and the entire world will spend their time to know God. And therefore, the Jewish sages will be wise, and they'll reveal great mysticism and great hidden secrets, and they'll get to the depth of the Creator according to as much as a human can grasp. So there's two sides here too. There's the time when Mashiach comes, where we, the Jews, are still trying to rectify the world and make the world want the oneness of God, trying to knock sense into the world where they should stop with their paganism and stop with their trinities and stop with their deitism and stop with their polytheism and all the Baba-Mises, and they should find one God. That's one aspect of it, and there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes you have to stand on the street corner, not literally, but figuratively, and say, "Hello, what are you doing? Don't you believe in Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and one God? What is up with all these secondary gods you've created for yourself?" But is that the ultimate? No. The ultimate is that the nations of the world will come to a state of spirituality, a state of holiness, where they on their own will want and thirst and desire to follow the 7 laws and to seek the one God, because that's what God wants of them. They're not doing it because we're telling them, or because we're educating them, or because we're inspiring them. It's not about us at all. That's step 1. Step 2, the ultimate, is where they're doing it on their own, right? Where they want to spend their time not eating, drinking, and being merry, for tomorrow you die, like that famous song, but that they'll be able to sit and spend their time intellectualizing, meditating, contemplating the incredible greatness of God and the oneness of God in an era where they won't need the world won't need force. The world won't need policing. I remember that class I gave a few months ago, I think it was back in July, about defund the police. Very catchy subject line. But the truth is, when Mashiach comes, that's the ultimate. We should defund the police. We shouldn't need police. Not because we should defund them and then riot and destroy the world. We should defund them because there won't be a need for them, because the world on its own, the people of the world on their own, will be seeking godliness, seeking the oneness of God, seeking to live by the 7 code, the code of 7 that God has given us. And so sort of taking us back now from this idea to Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah are going to give birth to Isaac. God changes their name, making them leaders, making them inspirers, making them motivators for the entire world. not just for the Jewish world, but through them and their child Isaac, creating a reality that what it means to be a Jew is that the entire world is blessed via you. That many ill people became healthy. Many women who were barren gave birth. Many people that were struggling were blessed because Isaac was born. Because what it means to be an Isaac, what it means to be a Jew is not to keep the blessings for yourself, but to share the love and the warmth and the inspiration, the meaning with everyone around us. If you are a living Jewish miracle, if you are a Jew, and by definition, any Jew that's inspired by Torah, when we walk around as a living, vibrant, enthusiastic Jew, we should not, by definition, ever only be inspiring the Jewish community. Everyone you say hello to should want to be inspired by us, because that's what it means to be a Jew. A Jew in a bubble, a Jew in a ghetto, a Jew in a state of hermetism, a Jewish monk is not a thing. A Jewish nun, not a thing. Right? That's why in Judaism, the greatest rabbis, except for one or two in the Talmud, but the greatest rabbis, sages, were all married. There's no asceticism. There's no, I'm going to connect with God. I'm going to marry God. He's not available. God's not looking for a shidduch. God's not looking for a match. Don't marry him. Go marry your wife and show how you can live a holy life with your married wife. Don't marry God. Too many ketuvos. We're not into that business. We are a religion where we interact with the world. We inspire the world, not by preaching, but by living, and by definition, being an Isaac, a son of Abraham and Sarah, who are leaders of the multitudes of the world. It means that the world around us is going to be inspired. So then why did God need to make extra special miracles when Isaac was born? Right? Why wasn't it enough just to make a miracle for Isaac and his family, for Abraham and Sarah? Because you can't. When there's a new Jewish baby that's born, part of that miracle, the way God created the world, is that the Jewish miracle affects everyone around them. So automatically with Sarah, we saw it right away. She was able to nurse many, many babies. She was able to bring blessings to so many people, because it became part of the creation that this baby brought with it, this incredible miracle. So then why the difference? Why by Abraham did it take 40 years until he brought his miracles to fruition with the birth of those 6 children, which is where we all started, the 6 sons that came through Hagar. And with Sarah, it was immediate. For Sarah, the feminine power within Judaism is always supreme. We don't believe in white supremacy, God forbid, or black supremacy. We believe in feminine supremacy. No, feminism tells you that in order to be a woman, you have to be like a man. So it's really not kind at all to women. Feminine supremacy recognizes that women have something that makes them unique above everything else inherently, without having to copy men to do that. So what the Torah says here is that with Abraham's blessing, right, because Abraham was sort of the male figure, the non-messianic figure. So in order for him to change the world around him by bringing the miracle of Isaac to the world, he had to do an action. He had to go and educate and do something. So many, many years later, he brought the miracle of Isaac in the birth of another 6 sons. But it was an extracurricular activity that he had to do, sort of like the coercion or the education that we need to do to convince people to follow the 7 Noahide laws. It's an action that you have to do by education. It doesn't happen naturally. Sarah, being the word Sarah means a minister above all, she was the queen, she was the princess. And therefore, the blessings that she brought about with her unique feminine power was that immediately after she was born, almost like a natural, just like we said earlier, that the ultimate is when the natural and the world naturally wants to accept upon themselves the 7 Noahide laws, not by force, not by education, but naturally their inner inclination wants that. Sarah brought that reality, that messianic reality to fruition in that immediately after Isaac was born, she was able to experience this incredible gift with the world in a way that the world can internalize it and accept it and receive it without having to do anything extra special to make it happen. The world was a recipient of it because it came about from a feminine, nurturing perspective of Sarah and sort of glided in naturally into the experience. The ultimate of the Sarah experience, the ultimate of that will be when Mashiach comes, when it says in the prophet Isaiah, the prophet Yeshaya says that the nations of the world will say, let us go up to Jerusalem, to that mount of Jacob, to the mountain of God, to the house of the God of Jacob, and he will give us direction on how to live our lives. Right? There'll be so much revelation for the Jewish people, so much godliness, that the rest of the world will be able to cash in on that on their own without us saying a word. Abraham is still in a state where he has to go procreate and have 6 sons in order to show the world that the way of God, the way of Judaism is an inspiration for all, and I'm going to go do this action to prove to the world that the miracle is real, that I'm going to show you here, this is what you got to do, get on board with this bandwagon so you can find God. So you have to do something unique. 6 kids was the way back then to show how that inspiration can carry over, and indeed it did, to the Far East. Sarah didn't need to do that. Sarah was the mother. Sarah was the woman. Sarah carried femininity, and what she did was just by her mere existence, she casually, naturally glided the world and slid the world into this miracle and sort of enveloped the world in the miracle that she was experiencing with the birth of Isaac in a very natural, internalized way, that the world can be a recipient of, and that ultimate experience will be witnessed and experienced when Mashiach comes. So I think that the lesson is twofold. Number one, we have to inspire the world. We have to stop ignoring the world. We have to stop thinking that the whole world is anti-Semites. Most people are not anti-Semites. Most people are ignorant. And you know how you take an ignorant person and make them an anti-Semite? Find something wrong that they said and call them an anti-Semite. They'll accept the title and they'll go for the anti-Semite. So when you hear a Gentile saying something that's inappropriate or wrong, and you're probably pretty certain that they don't hate anyone, they're just clueless, don't turn them into an enemy. Give them a hug and tell them why next time they should say it a little better. So the first thing we need to do is to stop fighting with the world and stop ignoring the world. Let's go out there and inspire the world. The second thing is that we should never forget that the ultimate is not to have to do anything actively to inspire. Our role modeling, our Sarah-like femininity, our Sarah-like role modeling should be enough that the world should see us and say, you know, I want that God too. I want that Torah too. I want to hear from that Moses too. Not because someone told me to, not because someone proselytized me to, not because someone tried to convert me, not because someone tried to bombard me, because I just saw the way they do it. I just read about and that's what I want to. And when that happens, we will know that we're inching so very close to the time we're all waiting for, the time that Sarah and Abraham were waiting for, the time that Isaac and Rebekah were waiting for, the 12 tribes of Israel were waiting for, and we will get there. We are the generation that will make it happen. The Geula Amitis Vashlema, the ultimate and complete redemption, the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, is be speedily in our days. Amen. Yes, we will have class next Wednesday night, even if your turkey's already in the oven for the 9-day celebration of Thanksgiving. We will have class. I look forward to it. And if you're on Zoom, I'll stick around for some questions. If you have any, have a wonderful evening. Zai gesund. And if you're in Montana, baby, the next 3 days is going to be minus a lot of degrees. So stay warm, say a little l'chaim and a good dose of Torah, and you should be set. Anyone on Zoom with a question, you can unmute yourself. If you're talking to me, I don't hear you because it's on mute. So if the Hazab is to sagen, I'm listening.
I really appreciate your comments on the femininity of the women, because that's one thing that in my non-room friends, so it's a big stumbling block. So I just love it.
Well, I will agree with you, Ruth, that it's one of the biggest misconceptions about traditional Judaism is the approach to the feminine powers, the femininity, and we're going to teach the world. What can I tell you? I can't do more than that. But one class at a time, we're going to remind the world that Gloria Steinem didn't do anything for women's rights. All she did was confuse the world about what women are meant to be. In the Jewish approach, you don't have to be like a man to be a proper woman. All you got to do is use your super women powers, and you could take the world. You could take charge of the world one state at a time. So we'll get it done, Ruth.